1984 by George Orwell was written post-World War II in the year 1949, during which there had been the rise of many single-party and totalitarian states. Orwell had seen the negative consequences of the oppressive regimes of dictators such as Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, and Franco during the 1930s to the 1940s. A key feature of 1984 deals with how authoritarian states stifled political dissent and took extreme measures to make sure it was suppressed. George Orwell wrote 1984 with the intention of warning people of the dangers of communism in general and how communist governments such as the USSR held a suffocating reign on their people and infringed on their most basic personal freedom.
1984 has long been the first book to which we have turned for a vivid picture of a government that has used war to justify infringement on freedom, that has used speech codes to limit everyone's ability to understand higher concepts or concepts that favor human individuality, that uses powerful media to build unwarranted consensus and rewrite history, and that has used technology to nip political opposition and individualistic or eccentric practices in the bud. Still relevant despite it being written over 65 years ago, the book characterizes and warns of the tendencies and motivations of unlimited government power and the horrifying, hopeless results of such a government. Humanity denied its right to think, to feel positive emotions, to be rational, and to dissent. Humanity denied its freedom to be human.
Society in Oceania is dominated by the party's Ingsoc ideals. Every aspect of life is suggestive of the party's rule, and disobeying the rule or speaking out against the party is an inconceivable idea. The party constantly watches all citizens for any sign of rebellion or thought crime, but through positive connotation tries to appear kind and concerned, rather than ruthless and invasive. It adopts the protective, reassuring persona of Big Brother, and the slogan, "Big Brother is watching you." The party went to the extent to make a language change in order to stay in power. To a certain extent, the new language would be considered ironic. Newspeak was created to narrow the possible thoughts a person can have to a point where thought crime will be impossible because there will be no language in which to understand it.
Throughout the book, we see many instances where the party and Big Brother use precise methods to suppress political dissent, and we can see the effects of these tools of power upon the people and the social construct of Oceania.
"You're a traitor," yelled the boy. "You're a thought criminal, you're a Eurasian spy. I'll shoot you, I'll vaporize you, I'll send you to the salt mines." This quotation shows that the party was working hard to make sure everyone was indoctrinated, even little children. The fact that the child says things like, "You're a Eurasian spy, I'll shoot you," shows that the children are growing up under a reign of paranoia and terror, where everyone was a legitimate suspect. Even though the child was only playing, this is an accurate reflection of the extent to which the party's propaganda was directed to the youth. Anyone who said anything against the party was punished and would face consequences. Even the children knew this. As a result, the party would ensure that by teaching even children to root out anyone who was a thought criminal and opposed the party's ideology, no one or no group of descendants would ever gain enough popularity, no matter how hushed it was, to overthrow the party.
Another quote in the book that gives some more insight on the nature of political dissent in Oceania is, "The most deadly danger of all was talking in your sleep. There was no way of guarding against that, so far as he could see." This illustrates the suffocation under which the residents of Oceania lived under the rule of the party. Since you're unconscious and unaware of what you are doing when you're asleep, the smallest thing can give you away. Sleep is the only time where it isn't possible to put your guard up. So instead, you have to learn to tame your brain before you close your eyes at night. The slightest twitch can give you away. The alliterative phrase, "deadly danger," emphasizes how getting in trouble or in danger in Oceania under the rule of the party is deadly. Simply disagreeing with the ideals of the party, even if it is internally, is enough to get you killed by the government.
Another quote that can show how political dissent was suppressed in Oceania would be when Winston said, "But the paroles, if only they could somehow become conscious of their own strength, they would have no need to conspire. They needed only to rise up and shake themselves like a horse shaking off flies. If they chose, they could blow the party to pieces tomorrow morning. Surely sooner or later it must occur to them to do it, and yet..." This simile conjures an image of a powerful creature waking up from the depths of its sleep and realizing that it's living in a world of injustice and wants to do something about it. This is a great image to be connected with political dissent. The party's rules are prevalent in almost every aspect of life, and no longer does Winston think that anyone should be passive about it. He thinks that the paroles should revolt since they have the best chance of succeeding. Winston himself does not want to be living in the world he lives in and wishes that circumstances were different. Yet he is not allowed to express any of these thoughts to anyone but himself.
The party's establishment of a new language, Newspeak, is also an important way through which political dissent is limited. In fact, in the appendix of the book, Orwell says, "The whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought." The author also states that it will render dissent literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. Also, by having a limited number of words, expressing yourself gets harder. The party does not want anyone to elaborate on their feelings, thoughts, and emotions. People in places of power, the party in 1984 for example, try to take power from the people under their rule by not allowing them to express their thoughts coherently. This stifles political dissent and ensures that the people stay under the control of the reigning power. Doublethink is another invention of the party that increases their control and limits the power of the people. Through doublethink, people consciously accept anything the party tells them, even if it contradicts something they already know. For example, at the end of 1984, Winston ends up truly believing that 2 + 2 equals 5. By making sure that the people of Oceania are truly indoctrinated and truly believe in the teachings of Ingsoc, the party guarantees that most people will go on with their lives without doubting the party's rules and ideals. In this way, any form of overt political dissent threatening to the party's power is suppressed. Any visible expression of dissent is dealt with almost immediately and very efficiently through the thought police in order to ensure that there is no damage done to the balance of power. If there are too many dissidents, then the party will start losing its control over the people, and this will give the people ideas for revolution against the party and Big Brother. Note that many of these methods of retaining power used by the party have to do with language and how it can be wielded into a tool of power.
Although it's been about 70 years since 1984 has been written, this predominantly 20th century governmental feature of stifling dissent can be found in governments all over the world today. Many governments today have laws concerning the inhabitation of political dissent, and there are many harsh consequences directed towards political dissenters. Here are some modern-day connections that are still relevant today.
Egypt is an example of a country where political dissent was and continues to be a catalyst for change. During the January 25th revolution of 2011, millions of protesters gathered in cities all over Egypt to demand the overthrow of the Egyptian president Hosni Mubarak, who had been president for 30 years. They did this through marches, demonstrations, acts of civil disobedience, strikes, and nonviolent civil resistance. The protesters, whose socioeconomic and religious backgrounds varied widely, focused on issues like lack of free elections, corruption, freedom of speech, state of emergency laws, and economic issues such as high unemployment rates, and food price inflation. The most important platform for the January 25th revolution was the social media platform. Protesters and activists from all over Egypt and the world communicated, planned, and shared ideas with one another. While it is true that many prominent activists were cyberstalked, surveillanced online, and eventually detained, a supposedly democratic republic like Egypt could not just ban Facebook or Twitter, like other, more totalitarian countries. Despite Mubarak's oppressive regime, there was a certain extent to which he held power, which gave space for ideas of revolution to grow and eventually result in fruitful consequences. As a result of the Egyptian January 25th revolution, about 1,000 people were killed as a result of clashes between police and protesters, and 6,000 others were injured. But eventually Mubarak resigned and was forced to stand trial and was sentenced to life imprisonment on the basis of murder of peaceful protesters and corruption amongst other charges. Despite this, Mubarak managed to weasel his way out and was cleared of all charges by November 2014. After the revolution, Mohamed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood Party was elected to presidency. However, he faced fierce opposition from secularists in the military, and in the course of a year was overthrown by a coup d'etat led by General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who was eventually elected as president. Many Egyptians are currently dissatisfied with President al-Sisi's rule that has led to the re-emergence of Mubarak-era practices, like torture, random arrests, and forced disappearances, and he has been criticized harshly by Egyptian activists as well as international human rights organizations such as the Human Rights Watch.
North Korea is a country that portrays what Orwell was trying to warn people would happen in the future. It is an example of a country where political dissent is suppressed at any cost. It is one of the few countries still under nominally communist rule. The government uses similar tools to the ones Orwell predicted to stay in power. The first is that the regime enforces an ideology. The Supreme Leader system established Kim Sung as the center of a cult of personality. At the core of the regime's ideology is nationalism, with a nationalistic, even racist slant. Anti-Japanese sentiment, hostility to South Korea, and propaganda against the United States created legitimacy for the regime. This is similar to the 2-minute hate Orwell wrote about. As the regime instills this ideology and cult of personality, it strives for tighter controls on information. Second is social engineering. They created a country where the very building blocks of opposition are lacking. North Korea has no merchant or land-owning class, independent unions, or clergy. Intellectuals are regime-loyal bureaucrats, not descendants, and the strict restrictions on the activities of students have intimidated them into submission. The most important would be that the North Korean regime is a brutal one in its use of force. Dissent is detected through an elaborate network of informants working for multiple internal security agencies, similar to the telescreens in 1984. People accused of relatively minor offenses undergo re-education. Those accused of more serious transgressions are either immediately executed or interred in miserable political prison camps, just like Winston was tortured for rebelling against the party. From a young age in North Korea, children are taught to hate the Americans, which they consider their enemies. The fact that the government starts indoctrinating their citizens from such a young age shows that they will go to any extent to stay in power. This is just like in 1984 when the child told Winston that he was a traitor. He was taught to root out anyone that disobeyed the party. As a result, all of this control by the government in North Korea has been able to hold their power over the citizens for such a long time.
These two examples highlight two opposing sides. In one society, political dissent is completely suppressed, hence resulting in the violation of human rights and freedom, but inarguably creating political stability. In the other society, political dissent has led to change and revolution, with citizens being able to exercise their freedom of speech to some extent, but political, social, and economic instability are prevalent in every aspect of society, and the leaders that replace the previous leaders post-revolution are just as corrupt as the others in many ways. So, the question many might ask is, should political dissent be tolerated even though it causes political and social instability? Or should human rights such as the freedom of speech and personal privacy be infringed and violated in order for governments to maintain power and control?